That's really something. On your path to the spiritual, you were still pretty much a skeptic of all things religious. How did you come to find a connection to Jesus and a spiritual home in a church?
Yeah, of all things. Well, I think you're being too kind to say I was a skeptic. I cared so little. I didn't care at all about religion or spirituality, to the point that I wasn't a skeptic. I was a sub-skeptic. I didn't care. It wasn't on my radar, which I think validates this entire story, because I wasn't a seeker. I wasn't born with any faith. Both of my parents had bad religious experiences as children, and that was the end of it for them. And I wasn't even baptized, nothing. And I knew nothing. I thought the Last Supper was that they'd run out of food. I had no idea. I mean, really, it was embarrassing. And it's actually very important, whether you're religious or spiritual or not, to read the Bible, because our whole culture, it's like Shakespeare. You have to read it to have the references right. So anyway, I had no interest and especially in Christianity. I believed that Christianity was all Tammy Faye Baker, all of it. I believed it was a bunch of televangelists, hoodwinking some well-meaning but unsuspecting people, and also my mother had been raised in the Catholic Church in East Texas, and the nuns had been severe with them, with her and her sister, to the point my mother wouldn't go back. Beatings, really, really bad stuff. And my father had been put in an orphanage by his evangelical mother, who went to South Africa to do the Lord's work. So he was abandoned by her, and that got tainted that way, that religion did.
So what brought you back?
Well, the Holy Pig Farmer, when after he spoke to my class, I called him the next morning to thank him again. And I was just, every cell in my body was just on fire about this guy. I didn't know what it was, and he just exuded this peace. And when I call him, he said, and he talks like a lake. If a lake could talk, it would sound like Lori Meisel. And he said, oh, I was told 10 years ago I would meet you. We're going to write a very important spiritual book together. Now, that was in late 1994. I was a nature writer and a fishing writer, and all I wanted was to get great assignments around the world. I couldn't have been more material, more earthbound. So to have somebody tell me I would be a spiritual writer was cuckoo. And yet I was so drawn to him, I started going out once a week. I called it Tuesdays with Lori. And I'd go once a week to his farm, and we would sit and I would just listen, really. And he often would say Jesus this, or the Buddha that, or in the Hindu tradition. But he often quoted scripture. And finally one day I said, why are you always talking about Jesus? Because it just gave me the creeps. I was so allergic to that. And he just kind of explained who the living spirit of Jesus actually is. Not that I believed it, but he kept kind of explaining it very non-dogmatically, and I think the real Christ energy, if you will, that what it's really all about, and gets so misinterpreted. Prince of Peace, but we're going to war. I don't think so. So finally one day, and Lori would say, he would tell anyone, he'll say, it takes this much willingness to know him. And I'd say, I don't want to know him. I don't care about that stuff. And every once in a while he'd say, it just takes that much willingness, that's all. So one day, months and months into this, I'm driving home from the farm, and it's a very, I think, very funny part of the book, because I'm such a brat. And I just say, okay, here's a little bit of willingness, okay? Just a little bit, just a little bit. Just a little bit of blooming willingness, okay? I'm just kind of being a complete, beyond cheeky about it. And I kind of reached out and turned on the radio, and the radio station announcer said, if you're driving west on, I think it's Highway 82, I think that was it, you know, you almost could hear him say, Jessica, you know, you need to exit immediately because there's been a terrible accident and it will be very, very long delays. And I knew to know that there wasn't any other way off that highway. So right when he said that, I looked up and here was an exit, just like that. And I just got right out of harm's way. And the moment I did, there was this presence in the car with me. And the only way I can put it in words is to say it felt like being in love when you really fall in love, but times a million. It was the sweetest, most profoundly beautiful experience of my entire life. And I mean, I'm getting chills just remembering it.
Wow.
And it was so real that I couldn't wait to get home and call the Holy Pig Farmer and tell him. I mean, I was just, you know, you just can't explain what it feels like to have been in the presence of a master, which of course is who Christ is. And I got home finally, and I called Lori, and he just said, "That's him."
And how do you think of God in the spiritual realm today?
Well, I side with Karen Armstrong. She's a wonderful writer. She has a new book out called A Case for God. And in it, she says that she thinks one of the reasons that Western modern people have so much trouble with the concept of God is that God is beyond our understanding. And it is something that you have to have a relationship with to experience it and to understand it. And she says we don't have practices. We don't go to church anymore. We don't do prayers on a regular basis, and so we don't build a relationship with the divine. But then that begs the question: what is the divine? Which is really what you're saying. And I was meditating about that, trying to figure out how to put in words what I know and what I've experienced, which is the hardest part of writing about the spiritual, because it's so ephemeral. And I had one of my vision things, and it's always kind of over there, and it was that Hindu god, you know, dancing with one foot up.
Krishna.
No, it was Shiva.
Shiva.
But I didn't know. I am always backing into everything because I'm really not a scholar about this. And it had the circle around it with the flames, and I'm like, okay, what is that? I've got to. Then how do you find out? You don't know the names. I went to the computer and I typed in Indian gods and I looked through and I finally found it. And lo, it was the dance of Shiva. The dancing Shiva is, I think it's the Nataraj, is how it's said in Hindi. But he has one foot on a prone figure, and that represents the triumph over illusion and ignorance. He's got a skull on his head representing the triumph over death, which of course is what Jesus in the resurrection and my Father's face in the sky is saying. And what the physicists say, which is where I will end up with my discourse on God.